more slides than I have minutes in the session, so I will jump into it. But yes, I like to see the messages in the chat. So we're going to be talking about what to learn next if you're a site builder and you're interested in furthering your career or potentially pivoting. My name is Ashraf Abid. I am the founder of Debug Academy. I spend a lot of my time teaching people Drupal and React and other things we'll talk about online primarily through Debug Academy. I'm a Drupal Grandmaster, and I worked at Acquia for a few years as a technical architect. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to share what, actually, is there? Okay, it is recording. So first of all, I want to share my understanding of what site building refers to. So in Drupal, site building generally refers to the tasks related to configuring a website, building a website, but not necessarily writing code for the website and not necessarily using the command line. So you may or may not be comfortable with command line tools like Git and Composer, but you probably are comfortable evaluating modules, building content types, using views to build pages, and more. So once you have those foundations, what do you do next? How do you get to the next level in terms of your career or your salary, that type of thing? There are so many options. Just within the Drupal realm, there's Drupal 7, 8, 9, 10, Backdrop, and within that, there are a number of technologies: PHP, Twig, Sass, CSS, HTML, JavaScript, a lot of things you see in this list, which we'll dive into. There's also JavaScript frameworks, there are other frameworks, and you have options that are not related to web development directly. Like I said, we have more slides than minutes, so when I see the opportunity, I will move forward, but please feel free to ask questions. I hope to have a few minutes set aside. And like Amy June said, posting those in the Q&A tab is helpful. So I'm going to be not only defining topics or introducing topics, but also trying to evaluate them as I personally would evaluate them from the perspective of a site builder. And the metrics I'm going to be evaluating them are not which tool is the best for building a website or which tool is my preference to learn. It's more by these metrics. Which tool is easiest to learn? What's the barrier to entry like? If you learn this tool, what's the likelihood someone will actually pay you to do it? If someone pays you to do it, will they pay you a very little amount? Will they pay you a lot? And this category also tries to include long-term, not entry-level, not only entry-level salary, but salary in general for that job type. What is the community like? So if you're learning this tool, will you be isolated? Will you have people to talk to? And how easy will it be to find people to talk to? I will share a link to the slide deck. Now, what are your options for what to learn? Again, this is if you are coming from a Drupal site builder background and you're looking to go to the next level and maybe become a developer or get a promotion. So there are too many to list. I have to be upfront. I'm not going to be talking about Java, C#, Ruby on Rails. There are so many options. I'm going to specifically talk about items that are close to Drupal, items where your experience with Drupal will be applicable and helpful. We also want employers to see your experience with Drupal in a favorable light. So let's see what options roughly fall into that category. The first group of options are programming languages. And before I just start rattling off programming languages, it's important to understand that programming languages, learning a programming language, is similar to learning a natural language. But programming languages, the difference between them and natural languages is that they have a much more limited vocabulary. So I can express myself in so many ways with so many words, but in programming languages, you have hundreds instead of hundreds of thousands of words to pick from. But also, there is no implication in programming. So if you can see me, I'm using body language, I'm using tone to emphasize and elaborate on certain topics. But in programming languages, you can't do that. There's no body language, there's no tone. It's very, very literal, it's very explicit, and you have a limited vocabulary. So as a programmer, you're sort of a translator, but you're going to be translating from business requirements or a human-friendly language to one of these programming languages. Okay, so that's the job of a programmer. Now let's take a look at a handful of programming languages and try to understand what they're like and how they work. HTML is sort of level 1 of programming. It's got a lower barrier to entry than any other language, and it looks like what you see on the right. The yellow tags are HTML tags. Here, if you want to put a header on the page, you put an opening and closing header tag, and then you put the name of your web page in between those. If you want a paragraph, you put an opening and closing paragraph tag, and you put some text inside of that paragraph. Now, HTML's vocabulary, remember I said programming languages have a limited vocabulary. They each have a different type of vocabulary. HTML's vocabulary consists of elements on the page. So you have a header, which appears on the page. You have a paragraph, which appears on the page. So when you're looking through HTML commands, you're just going to find elements that can appear on web pages. And when you write HTML, the audience you're writing for, the person or object you're speaking to, it's web browsers. So Google Chrome, Firefox, etc. Those are who will actually interpret your HTML. It's not the person who visits your website that reads HTML. It's the browser that reads HTML, interprets what you wrote, and displays it. Okay, so in terms of should I learn HTML, the metrics I discussed earlier, which admittedly may be inconsistently labeled, the ease of learning HTML, and again, this is relative to other programming languages. You might not find it so easy, but relatively speaking, I give it 10 out of 10. It's the easiest of what we're talking about to learn. In terms of job availability, 1 out of 10. If you learn HTML, it's unlikely that someone's going to hire you as an HTML developer. You could possibly use the skill in a content editor role, but no one's going to hire you just for the HTML skill. You're not going to get a big raise from knowing HTML, but there are many people, there's a big community of people learning to code who are very happy to help people learn HTML. So if you were to post a question on Twitter and use an HTML hashtag, or find a community learning to code, many people will be willing and able to help you with that. I am going to summarize the scores a little later on. CSS is another of these languages. Its vocabulary consists of styling, positioning, and visibility. So if HTML is the furniture or the structure, furniture and the structure of your house, CSS is the paint, the flooring, what do people do to decorate their houses? The the versions of the appliances, the TV being mounted, right? It's the drywall on top of the bare bones of your walls. Basically, HTML provides the structure and the content. CSS provides the styling and makes it look good. When you write CSS, again, it's being understood by the web browser. And this is what it looks like. In this example, we're saying for the heading 1, which we saw on the previous page, we are telling the browser to display it at 2.5 times the original size. For the other elements, we're saying to make them display as white. I'll answer some questions at the end, but I'll answer some now as well. Do you need to stack programming languages? For example, do you need to know one to do the others? You need to use multiple programming languages to build a website. You need HTML and CSS to build a website that looks good. You need HTML, CSS, and a third language to build an interactive website. Okay, so the CSS, again, the ease of learning, it's a bit more difficult than HTML, but it's still one of the more accessible languages to learn. If you were to learn CSS and HTML together, it would still be fairly difficult to find full-time employment. You might be able to find low-paying freelance jobs here and there, but by and large, you will not be able to land a job with just those skills. The base salary, if you do land a job, it's better than HTML. You would be a web developer. It still would not be very high, but there is a very big community willing and able to help you learn CSS. So we are going to need to learn multiple languages to reach a point where we are employable and in demand. Now, PHP. This is a backend programming language. Unlike HTML and CSS, which both impact or both are directly used for the display of content, PHP is used for the for querying data, for user access, and for building dynamic pages. Okay, so PHP can do much more. It can read values, it can transfer values, store them for later. It runs one line at a time. It has a logical flow. You can encapsulate code and call it again and again. The level of complexity in PHP relative to HTML, it's significantly higher, orders of magnitude higher. However, if you put in the requisite time, you can definitely learn it. I teach PHP, and I teach people who have never programmed before PHP, and they learn it. But it does take practice to get very comfortable. Now, here's an example of PHP. In this example, we write some code, this print statement, which is going to print some set of data. And we put it inside of a function, and we give it a name, display content. And after capturing that data in this function, we now have the ability to call on that function and to give it HTML to display. So inside of my PHP file, I can call this function we created, and I can give it some HTML code and tell it to display that code to the user. PHP would then give the HTML to the browser, and the browser would read the HTML. In terms of considering PHP for your career, the relative ease of learning relative to other programming languages, honestly, I might even lower this score, but I have it ranked as a 6. So, 8 and above, you'll feel comfortable while you're learning it. Below 7, I think you'll feel like it's truly a different language and like not a lot makes sense. And you just have to keep trying for a while until it sinks in. Ease of landing an entry role, it's much higher than HTML and CSS, but it's still not quite easy. Right? 6 out of 10 is not so great. So if you were to learn PHP and you were to be at an entry level, it's likely that it would be challenging still to land a job. If you got very good at PHP, you could definitely land a job. But I'm trying to be practical here, and without a lot of experience, it is a little tough. The base salary, if you do get pretty good at PHP and land a job, can be quite good. I have these arbitrary rankings, and I included salary in there because we're in a global economy. The salary is going to be different from one state to the next. But yes, you can start to get comfortable with a salary, with the salary you would make as a PHP developer. And you could even get into a 6-figure salary as a senior PHP developer. That's not a rare thing. And in terms of helpful community, there's not quite as big a community as there is for HTML and CSS. However, again, maybe I should increase that number. PHP does power a very significant portion of the web. I think WordPress alone powers 40% of the web, and WordPress is written in PHP. Drupal is also written in PHP. So you should be able to find communities of people to help out with learning PHP. But the market is a little bit smaller than it is for JavaScript. So a lot of the training companies don't focus on PHP. They want to sell as many seats as possible. So they go with the language that has the biggest audience. Now, JavaScript. JavaScript, it can run in the browser in Google Chrome, and you can interact with HTML elements directly with your JavaScript. It is an advanced language similar to PHP, and primarily it's used for displaying the front end of a website. PHP is primarily used for managing and outputting data. JavaScript is primarily used for retrieving data and displaying it, or enhancing the display of a web page. In terms of ease of learning, I think I ranked it the same as PHP. They're similar in difficulty to learn. Ease of landing an entry role. I think yes, I did rank this lower than PHP. And that's because even though there are more JavaScript jobs, there are so many entry-level JavaScript developers today. Because the JavaScript job market is quite large, most of the coding schools have focused on JavaScript. And now we've reached a point where you have all the coding schools releasing cohort after cohort of JavaScript trained entry-level developers. And because of that, it's very difficult and very, very competitive to land a JavaScript job. You might be up against hundreds of other applicants for every position. That's the one big knock that I have on JavaScript and React. It's that entry-level jobs are very, very competitive, and it's very hard to get one. But if you do get one, it pays very well, and the community is very large, and you can find a supportive community. So if you get in, it's great, but it's very hard to get in. I am going to give you links to this slide. Again, this is a short presentation. I think it's better for me to skip some slides to go on to the highest value ones and allow you to look at some of these on your own. I will skip ones that are less valuable, meaning these are ones that I will definitely not recommend you only focus on. If you were to learn Twig, you would not be able to land a job unless you also have complementary skills. Now, the high-level summary before we talk even about a couple of these other items. I tallied up all the scores, and I tallied up all the scores, including some of the slides we haven't gotten to yet. And I'm sure I'm biased, but Drupal actually came on top, not because it's easiest to learn. React is actually ranked higher in terms of ease of learning, and not because the community is better than React's. I believe I actually have React ranked higher for that as well, just because of the size of the community. The area that Drupal really wins is that employers are eager to hire Drupal developers, but so few people are learning Drupal nowadays. They don't teach it in college. We teach it at Debug Academy, but most coding bootcamps don't teach it. But because of that, we find that students who graduate our class are very competitive. They're only up against 1 or 2 people when they apply for jobs. And they're in a good position to land entry-level jobs or convert positions that are listed for senior developers, convince those employers to go ahead and hire more junior employers because there are so few Drupal developers who are well-trained and are on the market. Great question. Where would WordPress rank? WordPress is easier to learn than Drupal. I would rank it very close to React. I would still rank it lower than Drupal because the metric I'm focusing on is, can you get a job? And WordPress a couple of years ago, I would rank it above Drupal, but now it's becoming commoditized to an extent because it's so out of the box. You can launch a WordPress site very easily, and there are so many people around the world doing WordPress. It's very, very competitive, and the prices are being driven down. So the salaries are being driven down. Joomla, I would imagine, is probably similar to Drupal. So maybe I'd give it like a 30 or 29. I'd rank it pretty high in terms of you're probably not going to face a lot of competition for Joomla jobs. I don't know what the employer, or I don't know how many jobs there are out there for Joomla right now. When I say Drupal development, I'm referring to either backend or front end. And I am not referring to site building. I'm referring to site building plus front end or site building plus backend. And when I say front end, I'm talking about actually a couple of things. Git, let's see if I have it here. It's Drupal. I'm talking about Git, Composer, so command line tools, HTML, CSS, and Twig. All of that you need to know to be considered a Drupal front-end developer. For a back-end developer, you can replace Twig with PHP, but the rest of the list remains the same. In our part-time course at Debug Academy, we teach all of those, including PHP and Twig, so we kind of try to set you up so that you can get hired. Now, Drupal is a framework, not a language, and that means it's someone took the language PHP and they built something bigger, and you can use that as your starting point. And there are a number of frameworks. CSS has frameworks, PHP has frameworks, JavaScript has frameworks. And we know about Drupal. Symfony and Laravel are frameworks without much site building, right? You're going to have to do all the coding all the time. So if you're new to programming, it's hard to pick that up. Backdrop is very much like Drupal, but it's a continuation of Drupal 7. I imagine the market is smaller because people always want the latest version. But nonetheless, I think Backdrop is an interesting choice. In terms of JavaScript frameworks, these are all coding all the time, and it's a very competitive job market. If it weren't so competitive in the job market, I would rank React and Vue.js ahead of Drupal. And CSS frameworks make it easier for you to write CSS more efficiently. employers might look upon it favorably if you learn them, but they won't hire you because you know them. They are a secondary skill when it comes to hiring, for the most part. So I would prioritize skills that people would hire you as a primary skill. And once you're comfortable with those skills, only then circle back and learn a CSS framework. So I see Drupal as a low-code framework, and that's one of the nice things. If you're looking to learn Drupal, you may need to learn programming, but your day programming. You might build 80% of the website by site building. So that's the real beauty. And if you're all site builders, you can continue to use what you already know for 80% of your job. Even backend developers spend most of their time site building. That's the little secret that they don't tell you. So with Drupal, we have the ease of learning. It's more difficult than React, and more difficult than WordPress. But I gave it a relatively high score, and I put an asterisk. And this is sort of cheating, but I'm specifically saying it's relatively easy to learn if you go through a program like mine, like Debug Academies. If you don't, you can Google Drupal and find that it's one of the most hated platforms. And that's because people are self-teaching. And it's kind of difficult to self-teach backend development in Drupal because there are so many moving parts. Debug Academy is not the only program out there. But if you work with an expert who really knows what they're doing and let them teach you, then Drupal is fairly easy to learn. You all, if you're site builders and you've been doing site building for a while, you already will know a fair amount about site building. In my course, we don't teach much site building. We focus on Git, Composer, HTML, CSS, Sass, PHP, Twig, and building a real project as a team and contributing it to Drupal.org, all of those pieces that are harder to self-teach. And I found great success in students getting hired after going through that program. Symfony and Laravel, these are PHP-based frameworks. Again, you'll have to code a lot to use them. They're good if you want to be coding all the time. These are really great choices in that scenario. For any of these PHP frameworks, you're going to need to have a good understanding of many technologies. And even if you build a site with Laravel or Symfony, you would have to pair it with at least one of Twig, Vue, or React. A question. Drupal Bootcamp, my research came in at approximately $3,000. Is that typical? Yes, that's typical for a part-time bootcamp. Full-time bootcamps are sometimes $10,000 or $40,000 for programming. The Debug Academy one is also at about that price. But there are also ways to learn without going through a bootcamp. And from Debug Academy's perspective, we do accept people without charging them tuition or with a very generous payment plan if they can't attend the class strictly due to cost. Resources for learning the command line. I do have a list of some resources here. So we're not going to get through all these slides, but they are here and available. I did want to call out, you don't have to become a programmer. You could become someone who focuses on technical documentation. Landing a job here could be a little bit difficult, but the jobs are out there. And you could also become a project manager with a focus on web development. That can pay very well. And if that's something you're interested in, it's a great choice. Now, where do you learn these things? If you want to learn the command line, codeacademy.com is a good choice. They have free and paid options. Free Code Camp is also a great choice for learning web development, JavaScript. W3 schools, people who learned to program 20 years ago will tell you it's a bad resource, but it's come a long way. My students today tell me it's good, and I see it myself. It is pretty good. It's good for general web development, HTML, CSS, and PHP. YouTube is good. The problem is there's too many videos, so it's hard to stay on a specific track. So you'll find sometimes people tend to get lost in the YouTube videos, but there is quality there. And Drupalize Me is a good resource for, it's a paid resource for pre-recorded videos on how to learn Drupal. Drupal.tv is actually a website that students of Debug Academy built, and it's a free resource with videos from all the Drupal conferences. So you can also go to Drupal.tv and Google a topic, a Drupal-related topic, and learn about it there. And of course, I run Debug Academy, I teach there. Our classes are live, and we offer unlimited one-on-one meetings with students. So if you want to become a developer in Drupal, it's a really great way to learn. Again, we teach you Composer, Git, Twig, HTML, Sass, PHP, object-oriented programming, and Drupal API, and more. And we do it all using a team to build a real project. We have our designer, professional designer creates a design, and we all build a real project together, and we contribute that project to Drupal.org. Feel free to go to debugacademy.com and put your email in the newsletter if you'd like to hear about upcoming semesters. For learning at the Drupal or Symfony level, specifically, we do teach that in our classes. We have a program other than our 3-month course. We have 1 day, 1 week, 2 week classes just for PHP, just for Symfony, just for HTML, CSS. So if you don't want to go through a big, long boot camp, you could start out with something short. In terms of Symfony, I've always learned from the Symfony documentation and books. I don't know a great resource off the top of my head, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist. For this 3-month part-time program, it's 2 3-hour classes a week, and outside of class, you might spend 3 to 6 hours a week as well. So it's focused really on letting you switch careers without, being in a hardcore boot camp. It's really supposed to ease you into the new career. Great question. Thank you for asking about Drupal 9 and Drupal 10. Our Drupal course, we start with Drupal 8 and we migrate it to Drupal 9. Drupal 10 is not out yet. So in our Drupal course, we teach you both Drupal 8 and Drupal 9, but again, Drupal 10 is not out yet. But Drupal 8, 9, and 10 are very similar. If you learn one of them, you learn all of them. And I feel like I missed a question. Okay. Is that a specific career path or graphic artist in terms of designer? Well, being a designer is a career path. You can be a designer for print, for web, etc. I have a great designer on my team, but based on her experience, the market for designers, the job market for designers is very competitive. So I think it's difficult to land a job as a designer. So I hired her full-time and she took my course. So now she's a designer and a developer, which makes it easier for me to keep her around. And she's really great. So, best of both worlds from my perspective. But yes, you can take that story for what it's worth. She's a designer. She took my course to also be a developer, to be more employable. Drupal DevOps and sysadmin, I actually have it listed here. The tricky thing there is they really do require a lot of background in either being a developer or maybe having a computer science degree. DevOps is a very important role, and if you make a mistake, the website goes down and there aren't many people who could help you because it's very hard to find DevOps engineers. So there's great job security, there's great salary. It's very hard to just study DevOps and then get hired in DevOps. You need to make sure that you're very good. It's almost like there's no junior DevOps roles. You have to go straight to being mid to senior for someone to really hire you for that. That's the only warning I would put there. So I would probably get into web development first and learn Linux or DevOps while you're working as a web developer, and then a few years later you can pivot if that's what you want to do. I know we're a little over time, but now I want to see the questions. So I definitely want to post the slides for you. Let me do that. Let's see if this link is public. Here, I'll hit share, and I'm just going to change the visibility so you all can access it directly. Anyone with the link can access this, and they can view it. Anyone with the link can view it. So I will put this into the chat. And I will say, yes, Ryan, you're right. If you keep, the most important thing is to keep learning. Let me get my captions back on. It's important to keep learning. Here we go. Yes, so in this industry, it's important to keep learning. You don't learn a skill and then have job security for 10 years. You will need to continue learning Drupal 9, then Drupal 10, then Drupal 11. It sounds like a bad thing to many. However, that's also the reason it's easy to get into the industry, relatively speaking. So you can get into the industry by going through a part-time course like mine because it changes so often. So when you finish our course, you will know the latest information, and that makes you very competitive in the job market. I will say we often have people who are quite experienced programmers take our course. We have, what's it called? We have people who have never programmed before and people who have programmed in other programming languages or Drupal 7, and they all take the same course. And we need all of those skills to build a full website. So it's applicable whether you're a beginner or you're advanced in a different language. Let's see, would my designer developer be interested in mentoring other designers? I'll ask her. I know she's done some contribution work in the past, but yes. Oh, there you are, Lindsay. She's here. Yes, so the answer is yes. Okay, let me see if I missed any questions. I'm sure I did. And in this course, again, it ends up being about 23 three-hour classes, plus, 50 hours outside of class over about 12 weeks. And, what you end up building it can be really great. Okay, so I did post the slide deck. I think I answered most of the questions. Best emerging tools or technologies for building accessible, interactive, and animation UX in Drupal. Big question. I would consider using something like React, but it really comes down to the person who's coding. It's their responsibility to make it accessible. It's very interesting. Yeah, we're a small company, we're flexible. Feel free to put your name into our newsletter on debugacademy.com or just message me, and we can look into that. We're always looking for, looking to teach what people are most interested in. Lindsay has a lot of great ideas as a longtime designer who has been learning to code and now a Drupal developer. I think she has very valuable perspective, so I'd love to work with her and all of you to help you make that transition. Just reading the comments. Okay. And did I get to Anna's question? I saw there was a comment about that. Right, yes, I did. Okay. Let me know if there are any other questions. I hope this was helpful. I'm about 10 minutes over time, so I'm sure they'll kick me out of here soon enough. But yes, I hope this was helpful. Feel free to message me in the chat. I'm happy to answer questions. And like I said, we really don't spam. I probably haven't sent any email to our newsletter in 2 months. So feel free to go to debugacademy.com and put your name into the newsletter so you can hear about when we offer our next courses. Like I said, if you're not ready to commit to a 3-month course, we have a 1 and a 2-week course. So you can see if you like programming before you make a bigger commitment. And even if you don't feel like this is for you, I'll tell you, I've been teaching people for like, I don't know, 7 years or so, and everyone has been able to learn it. You know, there's sometimes a problem with the fact that the information isn't accessible or it's not written in plain English. We work very hard to avoid jargon, to meet you where you are, and to make ourselves available for one-on-one meetings to clear anything up. So, you know, you can definitely do it. And yes, like I said, feel free to get in touch. You can follow me on Twitter, email me. If you'd like Debug Academy to train your company, also feel free to get in touch. Okay, I think that's a wrap. Oh, do we use outside instructors? Not really. We do everything in-house. We are very particular about how the courses are taught. I have used outside instructors in the past a few times, but the student rankings tended to go down those semesters. So we keep it in-house, and we're very careful about how we teach the curriculum. Okay. I'll stick around for another minute, but again, thank you all. I've enjoyed it. I really appreciate that you all were so interactive, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day, the rest of DrupalCon and your weekend. Okay, I guess I should just hit the leave button. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you.